Welcome to our first podcast of Land and Legacy. I'm Scott Griffith, and with me today is my sister Carol Griffith. And Carol and I are here to talk a little bit about what our family life has been like, and to tie in the legacy of Livingston County, and just how real estate has been so intertwined with our lives and everything that we've done. Carol can probably give you a little better idea of what some of the things we might cover, and so go ahead, Carol.
So I think today, I think it's important that we cover just what it was like to grow up in Livingston County and be a third-generation realtor, and working with our grandfather and having the privilege of also working with our father, and then taking the business over ourselves. And lucky for us, we have a fourth generation now in real estate. So there's not too many other real estate companies or companies in general that can say they're fourth generation in the same area that they grew up. So we had some really great stories, don't we, about living in Livingston County and riding around in the car and talking real estate with the family. And
we had so you remember our grandfather, Harold Crandall, which was really, we always called him Bobo because we thought he was so funny. He reminded us of Bozo when we were children, so we always called him Bobo. But you remember he always had to drive the biggest convertible Cadillac he could get, although when we were young, he started buying hardtops. But I guess there's some great stories. Our father talks about Harold being a very, how shall we say, flamboyant kind of guy. Given he had such an amazing background that he started Crandall Realty in 1929 in Howell. And here he was, a widower with my mom, and brought her up in the same house that he had his office in, which is still the office in Howell for us today. It's a great history to have,
quite an unusual background, and to go and visit him at the office and learn that he lived there and he raised mom and only child there. I think when I was little, I didn't really realize he was actually my grandfather. I just thought he was that funny man that worked with Dad at the office.
Yeah, I have to admit, he was quite the character. And, the reality is when you think about it, as we sort of talk about the legacy of Livingston County, the fact that his parents had a farm and they had, 13 kids?
13 children. He was one of 13 children.
And
they didn't have TVs back then, I guess.
Yeah, I guess not. Make sure you have enough employees. And then, to be able to live to a ripe old age in his 90s, and of course, so did all his brothers and sisters, is remarkable, given everybody's talking about what you should eat and to stay healthy, and yet they all grew up on a farm and guess they did pretty good for their health, And so probably what people would find interesting, and is the fact that Howell being the county seat, and in those days, we had Grand River was the closest thing to a major road between Lansing and Detroit, which went through Howell. Howell was certainly the epicenter, and I can see why he started his business there. Yeah, even interestingly, and I know you know this, Carol, but my grandfather on my wife's mom's side, or her father's side, his business was the Howell Lumber Company. So a whole bunch of the local people who have been here for generations, all their families seemed to start in Howell and then sort of gravitated out just because of the county seat, and it was the epicenter of commerce.
I think it's so fascinating too that ironically his office is literally 3 doors down from the historic courthouse and across from the old theater, and it's still there. I mean, it's one of the oldest buildings in Livingston County, and so that has so much history there in Howell that, it just, if the walls could talk.
It's great architecture, isn't it? It's just amazing. And so...
But it was also fun that he was so engaged that he was willing to tell us so many stories of becoming a banker and then getting in the real estate business. And
then, remember he took us for drives, and we drive around Livingston County. It seemed like it wasn't, it was like what we did on Sundays is you drove around Livingston County and looked at things. And remember going down to south of Schaefer Road down in there, and there was some areas that had those artesian wells, and that was just, to me, was one of the most fascinating things. I always drive down in there, and here's these lakes with these pipes up in the air, and water's just shooting out of them, And that was like, I just found that so amazing that the water just came out of the ground like that with enough pressure, But he made it fun, there was no doubt about that.
Well, it was fun. It was also educational because I can remember sitting in the back of that big Cadillac boat, like they talk about the living room sofa.
Laying up in the back window without the seatbelt.
Kind of moving with the turns. But the one thing that I remembered, the story that he told me, and I still remember to this day, it still holds true, is wherever you see like a stone house in the country. I mean, I thought we were like in the midst of the moon or something, but you would come upon a stone home. And then he said, if you see one stone home, he said, you're going to see 3 or 4 generally in the same mile, because the stonemason would come build one house, build a second, build a third, and move on. And it's still true today. If you drive through the rural parts of Livingston County and you see a stone home, chances are you'll see one within a mile.
Yeah, and of course,
and
when you talk
kind
about
of
that,
interesting.
he also told those stories about those, what we call, what do they call, Italian cubic design homes, the square homes. They have 2 doors on the front. The one door was the informal door. The other door was into the parlor. But what made them fascinating is they had the widow walk on top.
Yes.
And he talked about how the farmers would literally go up and stand in the widow walk and watch the Native Americans walking from Detroit to Lansing as they would go back and forth, and they could watch them through the fields from up there. And that was just sort of like mind-boggling that that's just the life they live, that these people just wander around. And yet these houses, so many of them are made of brick that was made right here in the county, because they actually had a couple places where they made the brick to make those homes. And so it is such a treasure that we have those in this community, to be able to drive by and to this day realize how this rich heritage those homes have.
And when you think about, there was really nothing around those farms. So as you said, when you had 2 doors, one was a door to go into the household and the other door was designated for the parlor. That was because
we know the parlor was
when there was
meeting
a death,
meeting with the minister, and for deaths and funerals. So,
and that was the separate door, so you didn't go through the main entrance. So nowadays we've got a TV room or a media room, and back then it was the parlor. Your last move.
Has 2 front doors, because why do you need 2 front doors, right?
Exactly. So it's kind of interesting how things have changed, and yet it's kind of interesting how some things have remained the same when you think about how much farmland is still available in Livingston County. I think the last census said there's still 100,000 acres in Livingston County that is farmed.
Yeah, and having sat on the Farm Bureau's growth council they once had there for the state of Michigan, the sad story is how much farmland has been lost over the years, not because of development, but because nobody wants to go into farming.
It's not generational.
I mean, the majority of the farmland that's been lost over the years went fallow, and it wasn't because of the pressure on development. Though pressure on development in farmland does work. I mean, I think I have to usually explain to customers and clients and developers when I work with them that what makes for good farmland makes for bad development land, and what makes for bad development land, which is usually rolling, rocky, hilly, covered with trees, is good for development. And interestingly enough, in Livingston County, when you get to someplace, Genoa Township or so, about halfway between Brighton and Howell, the land flattens out and becomes very clay-based, and it's great for cornfields, but it's terrible for septics, So it's we live in a interesting area of different geology that allows for some really cool housing, but difficult at times,
If you think back in our grandfather's day, he looked at how were the soils for farms and selling farms, and today we look at how fast is the broadband system? Do you have high-speed internet? It's not so much about how much clay is in the ground or how many rocks there are. So it's interesting, and yet, like what we just said, there's so many things that are still the same. I mean, people seek out Livingston County because, although it seems so rural, at one point in time, we still have, 75 inland lakes, and we have, something like 300,000 acres of parks and open spaces.
And that,
just,
even that conversation we had about the city of Howell sort of was, or the Howell being the county seat was the first sort of urban center. And because of that, as the school districts consolidated, because, in the early days, there was a schoolhouse every section, which is a section, 640 acres. And so every section there was a schoolhouse. And as they started to consolidate, so many wanted to consolidate into Howell because it was the central big city at that time. And so people ask me all the time about why is the Howell School District such a large district in comparison, say, to the Brighton or any of the others. And it's because of the timing of when they created the school districts, and which farms they went out to the farmers literally and gave them the choice to which school district you wanted to be in when they were on the edge. And so it makes for a interesting dynamic that has no geo relationship to the municipal boundaries. It's just fascinating that way to me,
And I think that's a piece of history that most people don't know, which it just makes Livingston County so unique, and it makes it unique for us as realtors to be able to share that with some of our customer base, just because it's fun facts.
And, so now that we've sort of talked about the legacy, the one thing that probably is one of the most significant things to impact our county was, of course, the expressways. I mean, when you think about it, in the 1960s, they built I-96. I mean, you and I remember when they were building it, you could drive, you'd go up Door Road, and you had to go down over these embankments and across these, what ended up being the road bed, and then back up before they had bridges as they were building 96, and then they finally built that, and next thing you know, we were a convenient distance from four major job markets with Lansing, Flint, and Ann Arbor, and Detroit, and there began the pressure on growth that we talk about today, and we started to see the executive subdivision for the first time.
Right.
People living on 1 acre lots side by side versus out in the country, and somebody split an acre off their farm to try to pay their taxes,
Right, and it's just interesting how that all evolved, and I kind of think back on the time when Latson Road interchange opened a few years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And that connected one part of the county to the other county. It was an easy on and easy off now to get to Howell or the southern part of the county. But I just remember being one of the first people to, as my job as a county commissioner, the opportunity or the privilege to walk across that bridge that connected the two parts of the.
Oh, really? They had the county commissioners take a walk across it?
Yes, and I thought, wow, this is pretty neat when I think of when the freeway, if you will, 96 was constructed. Whoever thought that, at some point in my life I would be walking across even more development, but good managed development. And I think that's the other reason people seek Livingston County, is it's really been well managed and thought out. So it's still very diverse. So if somebody would like to move here and live on a farm, they can. Or, for so many years, Livingston County was seen as a recreational destination.
Right.
So they might have had a cottage here, and those cottages now have become year-round houses. Or, there used to be a park, an amusement park. And
well, you remember grandfather Crandall, who had Harold Crandall, the Crandall Realty fame, and then if you remember Mom and Dad, our dad's parents, the Griffiths, had a cottage on each side of Lake Chemung. And so my dad even talks about when he was dating Mom, you remember he would swim across Lake Chemung to come over and see Mom, and
that
then
was
they'd
dedication.
swim back.
Boy,
that's
sneaky dedication.
Yeah.
I bet
hope
he
they
didn't tell
knew
me
what they were doing. So, yes, but that's just fascinating. It's
I think
fun.
he did that without a noodle.
No kidding. And Grand River was the expressway at that point. So that was kind of fun stuff. There's been a lot of I think people get really focused on the development pressure, and yet at the same time, as you say, I think we've had strong planning in the county, and I think people have done the best they can. I think it's difficult because, as you talked about Latson Road, and we talk about development, that's a good example of where development couldn't take place till there were sewers because the soils were so bad. But then when they brought in the sewers, and now people see all that development there, and they talk about the density of development, but it's the old, chicken and the egg. If you can afford to get the sewer, and once you get the sewer in, you got to be able to pay for it. So now you got to have denser development. So you can't win for losing on these things. But there's one thing that our parents taught us, and I know you feel it, and I feel it, and that's the sovereignty of property rights.
Right.
When you were president of the Michigan Association of Realtors, and when I was president of the Michigan Association of Realtors, if there's one thing that we did is in our lobby was make sure people preserved their right to have their land and to have their property rights. And I think we've tried to balance that in Livingston County with the planning process to let people still have the right to use their land as they wish, to let farmers still be farmers, let people develop that wish to develop, have farmers be able to sell their properties when they can't, when somebody in the family's not going to take over and they've got to maximize their returns so they have a way to live the rest of their lives, be able to sell to somebody that can develop it.
Right. And how important that home ownership is to not only a net worth, if you will, but also to a community.
Yeah.
Because, so many statistics show that those who own homes, what the benefit is for a community versus, say, renting. So, the schools are better because the families aren't so transient, if you will. Those that own homes are typically, the majority are voters in a community. Those that own homes stay connected, volunteer in the community. All these great statistics that show the benefits of home ownership. And I think that's one thing that you and I have talked about. It's not about the size of the home or the price of the investment of the house that you have, because Livingston County is so diverse. You can have a lake house, you can have a condominium, you can have a cottage, you can build your own house, but the priority here is home ownership.
Ownership first.
Because it really contributes to a community or a county. And
it is really one of the last leveraged purchases you can make. When you think about it, today a buyer can put down as little as 3%, and they can start to build asset value and net worth, and they can do it over 30 years at an interest rate that I wouldn't give you a loan at. 3%, Lordy, I need more than that because I think it's riskier. But it is phenomenal, and we know. We saw the recession. We know that this can be a house of cards if it's done wrong, but at the same time, here we are in one of the most robust periods,
And we've seen it all.
We've seen it all, man.
I remember when interest rates were 21%.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that we had a lack of listings at that point.
There's going to be a generation here shortly that's only known a 3% interest rate. And when it goes to 6%, which I think everybody I've ever met has said is a fair interest rate, that it seems balanced. And so there's going to be a generation who's going to say, oh my gosh, it doubled. How awful is this?
And we sold for so many decades when it was double digits. When it got into single digits, we thought, oh no, never seen this before. Who could think it would go lower?
Think about it. In 1981, when you and I started Griffith Realty separate from our parents, and we bought the franchise because we were in our 20s and thought we needed a national identity. But at that point, we were in the midst of a recession. Right. And I remember quitting a corporate job, and you quit a corporate job, and we said, well, it's got to be almost over. And we started that. And at that point, interest rates were only at that point 12%. They shot up to 18% soon after that. And yet, and
we thought we were busy,
but people kept on. People kept on buying. The need for a home never ends, and those folks refinanced at some point and got through it. And so here we are now.
Selling their children
40
their
years
houses
later. Doing a podcast of all things, and talking about the old days. The old days. But at the same time, I think it helps us have perspective, and without dragging it out too far, I mean, I have had so many people talk to me about whether or not they think that in the current market, so here we are, 40 years later, and the market has been so hot that prices have driven up by double digits. I don't know if you call it inflation, but double digits, and the demand is so high, and yet the same dynamics that existed during the recession that caused the recession are not in play with this drive up. So when people are looking for the fall down, it isn't the same. Right. Having chaired the National Association of Realtors committee that developed policy on how to deal with the Fannie Mae Freddie Mac collapse, I can tell you we aren't in that same situation. I think we're in a different situation, and what it really just means there's more money in the market and prices pushed up, and yet I think they're going to level off. I don't think we're going to have the same fallout. It won't be because of the same reason.
No, and as we talked about, housing is a priority.
Yes.
But we also know from sitting on our national boards that there's a shortfall of 8 million houses.
Yeah,
and so it's not just Livingston County who sees a shortage of inventory. This is happening on a national level.
Well, according to the national economists, it takes 1.1 million houses a year to be built just to handle the natural growth of population and the loss of housing base due to things like fires and floods and so forth.
Formation of families.
And for 8 years, we haven't hit 1 million housing starts. So, how do you take a lack of supply, more money in the economy, and not have the situation that we see today? At the same time, it doesn't mean that tomorrow there'll be so many houses here that it'll fall down. I think it's just going to flatten out. So we'll probably see. We just saw recently a statistic shared to us by Lawrence Young, the national economist who we know personally, and he went back to the 80s till current day and did by the decade, and housing price growth beat inflation in every decade by more than 2%, 2 to 4% in every decade. So the value of having your own home, to owning property, is justified in every single market, no matter whether you're in an inflationary one, a deflationary one. But it's not surprising. Home is the family. It's like I mean, you and I are so blessed to still have our parents living in their home here in Brighton, and to be able to go out to it. My wife and her family all live in their homes. They're all here in town. We are, it's all about the family, The house is not an investment, but it turns out to be when you need it to be someday. But
it's the hub of the family.
It's the hub of the family, And we're very blessed that we've had that kind of
legacy
and to have that kind of relationship. So, but I think, Carol, I think that probably covers a lot of the legacy as in land that we know this week.
Land and legacy, so, that's right. And that's about all.
So we appreciate people watching our podcast. Maybe you learned a little something about the community. I hope you did. And we really appreciate your taking the time to pay a little attention to this. So thank you very much.